Hi everyone, I'm Will Justice. I'm the tutor for Biology 112. This is the review video for chapters 21 and 22, really just 22, because unfortunately my book does not have 21. I was able to flip through the slides though, and chapter 21 is actually very similar to chapter 1 from 111. So I don't feel like you guys should have a lot of difficulty with that. Um, Feel free to ask me questions about it if you do, but for this review session, I'm going to be going over chapter 22, which is all about evolution. So we really start the chapter talking about Darwin, who in conjunction with Wallace came up with the idea of natural selection, which drives evolution. The definition given in the book for evolution is descent with modification, which basically means that the next generation has modified traits from the first generation. And that's due to natural selection, which causes certain traits to become more common in the second generation due to individuals with better adaptations survive and breed, and those with uh, poor adaptations are going to die or not breed as well. Um, so the next generation is going to have different traits, and of course, after each breeding phase, there's a chance for genetic mutations, which will lead to new traits, and then natural selection will act on those as well. Chapter 22 is looking at how Darwin came to this idea, tracking his path aboard the Beagle to the Galapagos and to a lot of different islands and stuff, where he uh, saw evidence of natural selection. Um, Natural selection, the book defines as the process in which individuals that have certain inherited traits tend to survive and reproduce at higher rates than other individuals because of those traits. So their traits are better adapted for the environment than those that don't survive and breed. And Darwin took this idea and created trees of life. He was really the first guy to do this, where he's linking all these species back to a common ancestor. And the classic example of this, which he observed, is the finches in the Galapagos. Finches have all these different types of beaks in the Galapagos in order to do different things. There's like a beak for a cactus-eating finch, a beak for an insect eater, and a beak for a seed eater. But they all bear a resemblance to the finches that came from South America. So basically, his theory was some finches flew over here from South America, and then due to natural selection and evolution, they diverged into all these different species with the different beaks. And one way that he supported this thought was by pointing out instances of artificial selection, which his audience were already familiar with. The classic example of artificial selection is you take a wolf and you selectively breed it for a few thousand years and you end up with a Chihuahua. And the people in Darwin's time were very familiar with coming up with new dog breeds and how that works. So he says, if we can do it with artificial selection, nature can do it with natural selection. So the rest of the chapter, after establishing this, goes on to give direct examples of evolutionary change um, and evidence that supports the idea of common ancestors. One of these is homologous structures. A homologous structure is a similarity resulting from common ancestry. So the forelimbs in mammals, um, the structure of humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges is repeated throughout all mammals, from humans to cats to whales to bats. Um, Whales, even though they sort of resemble a fish, they have this homologous structure with other mammals, which helps show us that we have a common ancestor somewhere along the line, as opposed to whales having a common ancestor with like fish or something like that. Another example of homology is what happens in vertebrate embryos. With all vertebrate embryos have pharyngeal arches, which kind of look like gill arches, and a post-anal tail, which just means a tail that extends beyond the anus. Um, Humans have these things, kangaroos have these things, whales. All of our embryos look very similar, which is a good argument for a common ancestor that we have, and it shows that these stages are important to development in vertebrates. Vestigial structures is another thing that provides evidence for common ancestors, such as some snakes have a pelvis, or even vestigial limbs that almost looks like a little spur on the side of the snake. And that's essentially an anatomical structure that doesn't have a function anymore, but it used to in the snake's ancestors. So we can, through those things, we can see that snakes evolved from a creature with legs. Another example of that in humans is wisdom teeth or the appendix. These are things that had more use in our ancestors than they do with us today, and they actually tend to cause problems with us today. Something that is sort of similar to homology, but is different, is convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is similar to homology in that the two animals still have the same similarities, like a sugar glider and a flying squirrel. They both have those like skin flaps around their arms so that they can fly. But they both developed from normal squirrels that don't have that feature. And so they arrived at a similar anatomical end coming from a different place. Another example of this is bats and birds. They both evolved, excuse me, they both evolved the wing, but they don't have a shared common ancestor that first had the wing. So in convergent evolution, the structures are similar, but the parents are different. And in homologous structures, the structures are similar and the parents are the same, a common ancestor. The fossil record is another important tool for supporting evolution, such as its ability to for us to identify intermediate species, like the Archaeopteryx, the famous feathered dinosaur that is sort of a link species between dinosaurs and the chicken. So we can see the development of new structures that way, and we can date them based on their position within the strata. Biogeography is the study of the geographic distributions of species that helps us understand relation. So ratite birds is an example of this. Ratite birds include the emu, the ostrich, the kiwi. There was one in South America that went extinct. And because ratite birds are present in Australia, New Zealand, and Africa, but nowhere else, we know that those land masses were probably joined at one point. Similar thing with salamanders. Salamanders are present in North America, Europe, and Asia, but not in South America, Africa, or Australia. So that sort of gives us an idea of how the land masses used to be connected. And we can go the other way. If we have knowledge about how land masses used to be connected, we can make predictions about animals. So South America and Africa used to be connected, so we would expect them to have species with a common ancestor. That is essentially the end of the chapter. Again, if you guys have any questions about chapters 22 or 21, I'd be happy to go over that. Thank you for tuning in. See y'all next week.